You're tuned to 1520 WCHE Radio, and it's time now for the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will offer reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today, and now, Sam Hankin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader. It's a weekly broadcast here on WCHE at 5 o'clock on Mondays, in case you don't know. And we stream live as well, and subsequently we're published on Podomatic, iTunes, our bookstore's newsletter, Wellington Square Bookshop, our website, Facebook page, our Twitter, our newsletter, our YouTube channel, and any other social media I can think of, all of which we hope that you'll follow. In addition to the podcast, you'll also find valuable information about the store, upcoming events, and new, rare, and exciting books, of which today's is one. The book today is The Mountaintop School for Dogs and Other Second Chances, written by our guest, Ellen Cooney. Ellen's written 8 novels, has published stories in The New Yorker, and has taught creative writing for the past 25 years, most recently at MIT and also at Harvard. Mountaintop School is a really cool book. It's a book about dogs. I know. You go to our bookstore, there's lots of books about dogs. But let me tell you a little bit about this one and what makes it so different. It's not just a book about dogs. It's a book about the relationship between dogs that have problems, issues, and a girl who has problems and issues. Problems that kind of mesh and interrelate, and further how those problems, challenges, difficulties, hurts are ameliorated, are healed, are rescued, which is a key word in the book, in a place called the Sanctuary. There's a certain serendipity that runs through this book, one that many of you will find resonating in your own selves. It's the kind of coincidence that we all have encountered. A blind date, walking into a room at exactly the right time as a prospective employer who needs someone just like you is walking out, meeting the perfect stranger in an elevator. Here, our protagonist, Ellie, finds, purely through chance and at the right time, the position, the place, and the catalyst that helps her to be rescued, to be healed. So with that, thanks, Ellen, so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start with, why did you write this book?
Well, I wanted to write a book about teaching. I was a teacher for so long, and actually I've been teaching my whole life in one way or another. But I had already written a book about teaching. I wrote a book about ballet, about a ballet teacher, even though I myself don't dance. But I was thinking, what should I do with this teaching thing? Because it wouldn't go away. And I'm the sort of writer, I write what comes to me. And I write what won't go away once it has come to me. Around that time, I adopted a rescue dog, and I became his teacher, his trainer, and he was so wild and so unpredictable, I could not take him to a class because I didn't know who he would attack. So I became his teacher in a homeschooling way, and that's when I got into the whole issue, the whole world, or a whole philosophy, a whole way of life about not only living with dogs and interacting with dogs, but becoming the teachers of dogs. And that's how the book started.
Well, it's funny, you can even tell from the back jacket with those 3 dogs that you obviously love. And then when you just told us you wrote the book about ballet, when you don't know ballet, you do know dogs, and obviously you love them very much. And like I said, you can just tell that from the picture. So given that, and we'll talk some more about that, but given that, where did Ellie come from?
Her name is Evie.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep doing that.
It's because my name is Ellen. Evie is a young woman. She's in her 20s. Basically, all what she's done with her life so far is go to school and get into some trouble of her own. She was in a rehab of her own, and I don't want to give that away. But she comes from every young person who was ever my student. I taught undergraduates for a long time. I mean, I taught graduate students too in creative writing, but most of my teaching life was about young people, especially in their juniors and seniors in college. And I love that age. I love everything about that age. And I was able to tap into all of the interactions I had with people that age And I was able to come to this narrative voice that is the voice of Evie in the book, because much of the book is in first person in her voice. I feel so lucky that her voice came to me. She's based on sort of everyone that I ever knew. But in a way, she's a fictional character. She's not me. She's not any one person. What I did with her, what happened with her, I've been writing fiction for a really long time, and I felt that everything I ever knew about fiction came into the creation of this literary figure.
Well, what's really interesting about Evie is that her voice is it has such a kind of almost a biting sense of humor, and she has, a great deal of wit, and at the same time she's like on this voyage of discovery. But she does have a lot of elements. She's certainly not a one or even a two-dimensional character. She has, you end up essentially by the end of the book knowing her, and that's what's very interesting about it. So I can see what you're saying now about drawing on so many different sources to create this character.
Yes, thank you. Well, she is on a voyage of discovery, and in the beginning, she has no idea what's going on. There is a reader, and I'm getting a lot of mail on this book, which is so interesting and so gratifying in so many ways. But somebody wrote to me saying that Evie she's like a human dog. She's like, when she gets to this place that is so unknown to her, she has no idea what she's getting into. It's like what happens when a dog goes into foster care, or a rescue, a dog who was abandoned, or whatever reason was turned out of its home. That dog has no clue what's going on. A dog suddenly finds himself in an animal pound, in a shelter, or in foster care through a rescue group, or they're just roaming the street. What's going on the most with that dog, besides the basic needs of, eating? What's going on with that dog is massive confusion, and that's what's going on with this human. Such confusion, like what's going on. But she's very smart, and she is able to respond with her wit, yes.
And it's funny, too, because she anthropomorphizes these dogs so that she imbues them with these emotions that she's so certain of, and they talk back to her. She knows when they're shy. She knows when they're saying, "Hey, I run this place," like the dog that runs the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she does that, and I wonder, do you believe that? Do you feel that way about your dogs?
Not at all. No, because what she's doing, so much of this, she's young. And if I were her age, and if she's so imaginative. If I were her age, yeah, I might imagine the same sort of thing. She's sort of having this inner fantasy going on that she's like a dog whisperer, like she can communicate with the dogs, she can read their minds, she knows what they're saying. But in the end, what it's all doing is creating the conditions under which she can bond with the dogs. Because I think what I'm trying to get at, and I think what I do get at, is this thing about two creatures, whether human or animal or whatever, two beings connecting with each other somehow, which is the hardest thing in the world sometimes, and maybe the most important thing in the world. She does form bonds with the animals, and one of the ways that it happens with her is that she imagines what they're thinking. With me, with my dogs, I can imagine all I want what they're thinking, but they're going to be thinking whatever they're thinking. But I do know a little bit about actually communicating with dogs, because I spend so much time with my dogs, and I was their teacher. I still am. That I still have one that is still in training, And we do have a system of communication. And and I think when you're used to living with dogs, sometimes you actually do know what they're thinking. I mean, it's easy sometimes, a bicyclist goes by your house, the dog barks, you know what the dog is thinking. But sometimes you have to guess. And I don't think that's a futile thing. I think it's very, very useful because it makes you feel closer to the animal.
Which is really interesting also in the book, because when you realize, without trying to get too close to the story, when you realize that Evie is getting all these different contacts from people in the real world, so to speak, those she can't respond to, those she's not in touch with, but she's so in touch with these animals rather than with human beings.
Yes, and that's exactly what's going on. She let the setting is this sanctuary. It's a refuge for rescued dogs. It's literally a last chance for these dogs. And it's on the top of a mountain, and I never say where the mountain is. I did that on purpose. Mm-hmm. It's this awareness from the world. So it's the main character, and in a way, it's your basic quest novel. The main character, this young woman, and there are other characters in the book, but she is the main character. She goes off on this quest. She's trying to find herself a future. She's trying to find herself, and she enters this state, literally, of awareness. And what she decides to do is not have any contact for a while between herself and the outside world. So she has this family, she has people back in the world that she cuts off connection to for this period of time, because she's kind of in an initiation phase. She's in her apprenticeship to become what she's about to become. And I think in cutting herself off from the outside world and from her old connections, that's the only possible way for her to become a person.
That's interesting, because one of the ways that she knows her dogs, and it goes back to contact with people too, is in the beginning of the book, each of the dog has its own little resume in italics of what the dog's been through, what you can expect of the dog, what not to do around the dog.
Yes.
And we don't get that in the real world, do we?
No, we don't get that in the real world. Well, you do. Like if you were to go and volunteer, say, at an animal shelter, mm-hmm. you would be given, there would be notes. Say you went to an animal shelter as a volunteer, and you were going to help out by taking the dogs for a walk. You would be given some notes on what's going on with that dog.
Oh, I meant it coming from the other angle. When we meet a human being.
Oh, well, we meet, of course. Okay.
We don't get a little piece of paper saying
but
this guy.
Don't you wish? Wouldn't that be much easier?
It would be great. Yes.
Well, yes, of course. And and Evie has to end up writing some kind of note on herself.
Right.
Yeah. And in the real world, it would be so hard for us to even do that for ourselves. Sum up your whole life in, a couple paragraphs. I certainly couldn't do it.
You could say whether you were scared. You could say whether you were frightened. Same thing. You could say whether you had been abused. It would just be a really hard thing to write in a paragraph.
Yeah. And what would you cover up? Oh, yeah. But see, even with the dogs, and I think one thing that comes out is when you meet someone, or when you, human or dog, you don't know what they have inside them. You don't know what happened in their past. No. And sometimes they don't know, or they don't want you to know.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking just now, how certain people you meet compartmentalize everything. And it's kind of an easy life because they don't have to worry about something that's really bothering them because they just package it away. Uh-huh. I've never been like that. I have this free floating anxiety. But it would be nice to be able to do that, but you also close off a lot of yourself to the outside world, or as much as you want to close off.
Yes, you do. And that's exactly what goes on with the other main character, the middle-aged woman, Mrs. Aubuchon.
Yes.
Mrs. Aubuchon is officially a staff member of the sanctuary, and she is That's exactly what she is, and I didn't even realize that until now. She is compartmentalized. This is the way she's doing things. This is how she wants to talk. This is how she wants to interact. And she has all these rules, but they do start to break down. Yeah, they do, because of Evie. Because Evie is going through all these changes, and her transformation, or whatever you want to call it, which is not sentimental, and it's not even it's realistic, and it's also very funny. And as she's having all her changes, it affects the people around her, especially this compartmentalized woman. Absolutely.
Well, it's funny too, because it's nice the way you change the voice, and then you get inside Mrs. Auberjon's head every once in a while, and then you realize, okay, it's like the Lou Grant character in Mary Tyler Moore, this really gruff exterior, especially at the beginning when Evie lines up her sugar in a line on the table. And you see it from both sides.
Yeah, you see her from the other side, from the cranky middle-aged person. Yes, and there's this young person screwing up everything. It's in the very first you see Mrs. Auberjon first, and she's getting ready for Evie to come, and she says all she can think of is, "Oh, I just don't want any trouble. I just don't want any trouble. She better not be trouble." And then you turn the page, and within one paragraph, you're like, "Uh-oh, here comes trouble."
And the way you begin it also, which is good, is that Evie gets to hear Mrs. Auberjon complaining about the way she left her table.
Yes.
And so that's the first time you really get an idea externally, luckily, that she gets to hear that. I thought that was good, too.
Yeah, she eavesdrops on, there's this woman who comes down, who comes to there's this woman who, I call her Mrs. Treats.
Yes.
Because she makes homemade treats for the dogs. And they talk about Evie. And Evie is absolutely mortified. But Evie also has problems with lying and in her own life, because then in the next thing that happens, the other main character, who's a teenage boy, he says, because it's snowing, and he says to her, he wants her to go outside with him, and he says, "Can you walk on snowshoes?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, of course." And then, she's thinking, what could be hard? And then, of course, 5 minutes later, she's flat on her face in the snow.
Yeah, but he's happy about it.
He's happy about it. Yes, he's like 15.
Yeah.
And I had an absolutely marvelous time. I think anybody reading this book, reading about this teenage boy, would probably guess that I myself raised a son and went through adolescence with a boy.
Well,
yes.
Did you?
I did.
Yeah, it's another situation where he's so kind-hearted and means well in so many ways, but sometimes it kind of doesn't really backfire. What does it do? Is this?
I think he's just being honest, because when he catches her out, he sets her up.
Yeah, he does.
So that he can catch her out lying, because he's saying to her, "Hello, do you think for 5 minutes you could try to be an honest person?" Because he's so honest. And then he keeps giving her another chance after another chance. But at the same time, he's very wary of her, because he has a job to do, because he also works for the sanctuary, and he's kind of in charge of her, and he has no clue what to do with her either. So it's this whole book, well, not for the whole book, but for much of the book, of people in situations where they don't know what to do. And then they somehow have to do something, and they're all making it up as they go along, and so are the dogs.
Yeah.
And I think, isn't that what we do in life all the time? Aren't we making stuff up all the time as we go along?
For most people, it's very seldom that you meet somebody, I can count them on the fingers of one hand, that don't really resonate. They don't ring like a bell inside. They're just totally integrated. And I guess they're like bodhisattvas. I guess they're like little Buddha kids. And
yeah, they need a dog. That's what I would say. They need a dog. My dogs in the book are all rescued dogs. And one thing I've heard in my mail that's coming in is it's that people have the misunderstanding, I think, happens in my book, that people who I think aren't used to dogs feel that the dogs in my book are dangerous. And I just want to say they're absolutely not dangerous. Because Evie meets the dogs, and one of them, there's a little dog named Josie, and she does nip Evie on the wrist. But there's a background to that, and Evie shouldn't have done what she did with that dog. But the dogs are not dangerous, and I'm very confused as to how anybody would think these dogs are dangerous, because they're absolutely not. And I think there's what I think happens is this prejudice, especially prejudice against large dogs. And I think people are scared of dogs. They're scared of large dogs. People can be scared of dogs who are rescued, who were once abused. A dog. I think there's a dog who we suspect was beaten because he's so afraid of any wooden objects. And I think what can happen is people get scared of animals like that because, this dog was abused, they're going to bite me. And that just makes me very sad.
Well, I'll tell you what is a stereotype, but it happens, is that people are scared, and it figures in the book. People are scared of pit bulls, for example.
Well, I was just going to say that too, yes.
Like nine out of 10 mothers probably wouldn't allow their infant or toddler to be near a pit bull. It's just almost a visceral response now in today's society.
Yes, but you have to wonder why.
Yeah, you do.
And because there's such a bad stereotype out there, and it's this because of course, fighting, and that is in my book. There are pit bulls in my book.
Yeah.
And there is. I touch on the aspect of dog fighting, and I think people who have dogs that they force into fighting, that they train into fighting, and they live in the world of fighting, they call it sport. They call it a sport. And you can find websites, you can find tons of information out there where these people will say, we are only allowing pit bulls to do what they naturally want to do. And I think a lot of that has gotten into our culture, and that is just horrible.
Well, your book, there's a scene in your book which portrays it perfectly, where on the computer, Evie's watching this guy talking about how much he loves his dogs, and what he does is races greyhounds. And she posts, what happens to these dogs after they're done racing, and the post is immediately deleted.
Exactly. Exactly. What does happen to greyhounds after their 2 or maybe 3 years of racing? There are greyhounds in shelters and in rescue groups all over America. There are thousands of them. And the people who race greyhounds don't want to talk about that at all. If the greyhounds actually do survive in their post-racing world, yes, I get into the whole greyhound thing. And then there's my greyhound Alfie, who he doesn't want to move. But see, I think one thing I was able to look at too, is this whole concept of, what is a dog anyway? What is an animal anyway? Does an animal have rights? Is an animal the slave or the servant of a human being? And there are lots of people who think that animals don't have rights because they are property of humans. And I'm saying, well, okay, let's think about a right of an animal. Here's a greyhound who had this really, really awful life being forced into racing against, his will. And here he is, he's been rescued from his racing life. Does he have the right to say, you know what, I don't even want to go out for a walk? And I'm saying, well, why not let him have that right? Yes.
Well, it happens to a woman in your book, really.
What happens to what?
No, there's a woman in your book who responds the same way to her own hip injury. She just kind of... Oh,
yes, Mrs. Treats.
Yeah.
Mrs. Treats ends up with you made that... What a good reader. I didn't even think of that. Yes. And so the Mrs. Treats breaks her hip, and she's this old lady, and she can't do her work anymore, and she wants to give up. She does not want to move. Yeah, but look what's going to happen to her. Not that I'm going to give it away.
No, don't. But you can talk about how, I love the metaphor where you say, she says, she's like a cake. You know, you have all these ingredients, you put them together in the oven, the cake bakes, and then it's done. And she feels like, okay, I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I did what I did.
Because she's a baker, and that's
right.
what a baker would think. I'm done.
Well, the funny thing is that sometimes dogs are proxies, and I see this over and over again, where a couple marries, they have a dog, they treat the dog as if it's their child, and they give it all their affection, and they won't leave home, and they are afraid to go on vacations, and then all of a sudden they have a child. And then the dog becomes this second-class, if that, citizen.
There's a dog that happens to. One of the first dogs you meet in my book had that very thing happen. Yes.
And they aren't bad people.
No, they're not bad people, but it's yes, there's so much. I see it so much. You look at all the people who dress their dogs up in outfits. It's.
I was drinking water when you said that, and it almost came out my nose.
Well, yeah. Look at that. I mean, a dog is an animal, and a lot of people do use dogs for stand-ins for a human relationship, and I think that's really unfair to the animal. But on the other hand, a dog is being given a home. But the repercussions, like when it's over, when the human doesn't need that proxy anymore, it's like with the greyhound. What is going to happen to the dog? Yeah, and sometimes people can forget about that their dogs actually do have a right to their own life. Yes.
Well, we're all living in this real world where, like you posit, what is a dog? And it's really funny because, in my mind, and maybe you disagree, dogs give unconditional love, but they also expect and many times get unconditional love.
Yes.
But I have a Labrador. I have alpacas. I have chickens. I have ducks. But I have 3 cats, Miso, Thomasina, and Maynard. Uh-huh. And it's really interesting watching the interplay between Putney, the lab, and the 3 cats. And you realize, and I know it's been said many times, but the cats basically, they'll come up to me and say, "What can you do for me?" I mean, seriously, where is my food?
Yes.
And I want to come out or I want to go in. Other than that, I may rub up against you, but that's because I want to.
Yes.
And I don't really care what you want.
Yes.
It's a completely different thing, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. Although, sometimes my dogs look at me, what can I get? What will you give me? But at the same time, we have a long history with dogs. Dogs came in from the wild and became, evolved from whatever they evolved from, wolves or whatever. And they became domesticated, not like a cow became domesticated or chickens became. They're different from cows and chickens because they came in and live intimately with us. I think because dogs they started out with humans in a way of protecting humans. And I think the protectiveness of a dog for a human, I don't think there's anything like it. Like when I lie down in the daytime to take a nap, because I often write at night, I have a dog who will stay right by the window as if a killer is going to come in. I live in rural Maine, and he acts like a killer is going to come in the window while I'm asleep and get me. And he does that every single time I take a nap. And I didn't ask for it. He just does it.
Well, whereas I have a cat who sleeps on top of my head, and if I push him away, which I do, which you probably don't like, but I push him away. And then he's back on top of my head, and it's like, oh, come on, Lisa, give me a break.
I don't have cats, but I have a golden retriever who tries to sleep on top of me all the time.
Right, it's like people say.
With their pillow. Yeah.
It's like one of those dogs that thinks he's a lap. They all think they're lap dogs when they get big. It's funny.
Yes, they do.
But the thing is, you obviously, again, even from the picture itself, you give them so much that they are more than willing and excited about being with you and having this relationship. Not all people, as you say in the book, obviously, definitely in the book, not all people have that same type of relationship. Yours is like a kind of heaven for them. And, and no one can, it's really hard for someone to get to the place that you are. You can't expect people to be there.
I don't think it's that hard, because if you if you think about your relationship with your animals in terms of, is this my pet or is this a member of my family? It depends on how you define family.
Yes.
And are you, and in my family, we're kind of a democracy. Well, I'm the boss. But at the same time, we are a democracy, and I don't do a thing with my dogs of, you must obey every single thing I say to you. I don't hyper-control. But I was like that with my child, and I really believe in the integrity of the other. I believe in mutual respect, and I think it's actually a lot easier than most people think to just sort of relax a little bit and stop trying to be so hyper-controlling and just be yourself with your animals. I really don't think it's hard at all.
Well, let me ask you this question then. Parents do this with children, and I don't fault them. I don't fault them. Suppose you have a really bad day at work, and you come home and you yell at your child. Your child hasn't done anything wrong. Or many people find it easier to come home and yell at their dog because it's not their child. They're not bad people, but no one's perfect.
You're absolutely, we're not perfect. And you know what? I yell at my dogs all the time. I yelled at my kid all the time. and I think there's a difference. I think like if you went and yelled at your cat, say, at any one of your cats, if you yelled at your cat, the cat is still going to know if you love them. There's like if you come home from work and there's your cat and you just yell and you say, "Oh, I hate your guts, get out of my way." That cat is going to know if you're just saying that because you're just saying it, or if you're saying it because you really are kind of a jerk and you don't love anybody. They know.
No, I disagree. Here's the way it works. Putney, my dog, if I came home and said, "I hate you, I don't want you anymore," he'd go to his bed, he'd lay down, he would look as sad as any living creature has ever looked. Whereas if I said that to any of my cats, they would just, I can't even use the language that they would say about me. And then they would just say, "Okay, well, I'm out of here. When you change your mind and become a regular person, then I may come back and you can feed me."
Yes, of course. And of course the dog will, you just broke his heart. But in 5 minutes, he's going to forgive you. And he's going to forget about, you're going to get the treat. He's going to take the treat, and it's all going to be forgotten. That's very different from someone who chronically is abusive to their dog.
Agreed. And you know what? It's the same place. It's the same as in a workplace. If you have a boss who just constantly says, "This isn't what I expect. I expected a lot more out of this. Why did you do it this way? Why did you do it this way?" Instead of saying every once in a while, "Attaboy, that's what I expected." Attaboy, just like you say to a dog.
Exactly.
And you say, "This is really good. Good job."
Yeah.
How much more do you get from that than the demeaning kind of language?
I know. But the animals do know the difference, and it depends on what is at the basis of the relationship. In a work situation, and I for me, work is mostly teaching, but I have worked in colleges and universities and MFA programs where, say, a department chair is very, very controlling and very always stern, always strict, always, finding fault. And why not just loosen up a little bit? I think it comes down to control and power issues.
Yeah, well, that's true. And, the old saying over and over again that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes, and with our animals, we do have power.
You actually have absolute power, and to not be corrupted is a very difficult thing to do, but it's also a very noble thing to do. And I think, it's a process of sublimating your own ego, which is hard to do, but a very good thing for you to do in life, I think.
Yeah. But you see people with their dogs all the time when they are hyper-controlling. You could just see it on the way people walk their dogs. You can see the relationship, and you can see, like, one of the things that I found out when I was doing all this research for this book was a dog trainer who'd been at it for a really long time, giving classes that were mostly about humans, and saying to the humans, why don't you smile at your dog a little more, like just in general? And people were answering things like, oh, you know what? That's just what my kid's teacher says. Why don't I smile at my kids more? Yeah.
That's very interesting. So, before I let you go, how do you figure dog years? Because you mentioned dog years in your book tangentially, but, do you figure dog years like it's 7 years a year, or do you do like 21 the first year and then 4 years thereafter?
I don't. I don't even think about it because I stopped thinking about it because my oldest dog is 8 years old now.
Uh-huh.
And he's starting to slow down a little bit. And I don't want to think about him getting older. I'm in denial about it. So at this moment, I'm not thinking about dog years at all.
I wouldn't have asked, except you do, towards the end, you do say something. I mean, I think Evie says something about it. But it's just funny because, my dog also, the lab, Putney, he's 8 years old now, too. When you start getting gray around the muzzle, and especially with labs, too, they start feeling it. And, I just was curious as how you felt about it. That's an interesting answer.
Yeah, I decided since I finished this book, my oldest dog, just lately I've looked at him like he's a little slower, like he goes up and down the stairs a little more slowly. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, he's getting older. I can't even deal with this right now. I'm a fiction writer. I have a great imagination. I can compartmentalize that.
Good. That's helpful. Well, so anyway, here's the thing. So at my bookstore, which is an independent bookstore, and as I said, I would love to have you come and sign if you get the chance to come down this way.
I would love to.
And then, your book is on the front table, and it'll be a staff favorite. And one of the reasons I want it to be a staff favorite is because we have so many books that come in now about dogs and cats. But like I said at the outset, the difference here is that you have this, total meshing. That's not the right word, but
meshing, meshing.
Okay, meshing of these.
Meshing, and it's not. It doesn't I don't romanticize dogs, and my dogs don't narrate. They're animals. Right,
and you don't romanticize Evie either at all, which is hard.
I don't romanticize anybody.
It's hard for the reader sometimes because the reader, or at least me as a reader, I kind of. Not fell in love with her, but really identified with her and liked her a lot. And sometimes she didn't perform the way I wanted her to necessarily. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a sign of a good book, that you and the writer aren't necessarily going to think the same things at the same time.
Right. Evie drove me crazy. Just like students drove me crazy, just like my child drove me crazy, just like my dogs. We all drive each other crazy. I was being true to human nature, I think.
You're great. It's great because it gets it out of your system. I don't know how I need to get mine out of my system, but it's a great method of doing it. I want to thank you so much for being here, and I really loved your book.
Thank you.
And like I said, we'll be publicizing it everywhere, and so the best to you. And when you write your next book, come back and talk to us if you want to.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Okay, Ellen. We'll talk again soon.
Take care.
You too. Well then, that was Ellen Cooney talking about her book, The Mountaintop, School for Dogs, and Other Second Chances. Like I said, we have so many books about dogs, it's ridiculous. And most of them, to be honest, I don't really like. They're supposed to be funny and all. I didn't even like Marley and Me that much. Well, I kind of liked it. I didn't like the movie. But anyway, so the thing about this book is that it's completely different in the sense that it takes a human being and a dog, and as we both agreed, meshing is a good word. And so you get a taste of both, and it gives you an idea of how character develops in each of these creatures and how both can be rescued from situations that might seem either abysmal or kind of locked in. But if you have the strength of character and you have a guide on either side, then you can find yourself out of that mess and ready to start a new life. Which is kind of true of who we're going to be talking with next week, which is the author Maria Venegas, who wrote Bulletproof Vest, The Ballad of an Outlaw and His Daughter. I didn't even know it was a memoir until I got to the last page. It reads so much like a novel. But it's a memoir about an Americanized, which is not a word I like, but it's an Americanized Mexican woman and her true Mexican father, Jose, who is a real pain in the ass kind of guy, but also the kind of guy that survives anything, being shot at, being in car accidents, being knifed, and he has like 9 lives or more. but he's also horrible to his family. But then somehow the daughter, one of many siblings, finds a way to reconnect with her father. And it's a great book because it gives you an idea about the culture in Mexico, the culture in America, how those differ and how in some ways they're the same. But the two geographies, the borders of geography, borders of time, are really well articulated in this book. And I look forward to talking with Maria next week. And as always, thanks so much for joining us today. And we'll see you next week again on The Avid Reader.
You've been listening to The Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will be back next week with reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today.